What's new? Well, a lot of things are new. Basically, I've done music business stuff for the last 10 years. And right now, there's a big shift happening in that the music industry is becoming part of the media business in a much more integrated way. I mean, it's complete convergence, right? It's music, audio, games, television, broadcasting is all coming together, and technology. So I'm moving into other areas. I'm moving more into doing stuff more for film and broadcasting, but also into advertising and branding. I think ultimately what we're looking at here is a media economy that's very heavily supported by advertising and by branding. And with that, I don't mean, old-fashioned advertising that people don't like, but advertising that is actually content itself, as weird as that may sound. But so I'm moving into that a little bit. My new book, Music 2.0, will be sort of my finishing piece for the music arena, and I will continue to talk about it. But it's basically, at this point, I think it just needs to be realized. At least some of the ideas are already being realized. And then I'm moving on to writing a new book called Open is King. And that's very much about the new way of selling content in a networked world. So Open is King, the subtitle is The Future of Media Beyond Control. It's all about the subject of not controlling what you own in terms of content, in terms of distribution, but making money with it in a different way. I think there's two things that are clearly important. One is the creator, the talent, needs to get paid, and they need to get paid in a way that rewards them richly if they're vastly popular. And of course, I'm looking to do that myself. And the user needs to get what they want without punishment. And I think that's where the whole thing is moving, is to bring those two together. Right? So rather than having a media industry that creates scarcity, that creates friction, it's a frictionless system that's ubiquitous, to where the monetizing, the making money of the talent is built in. So we're going to see flat rates for content, just like we see flat rates for online access. In fact, of course, online access will most likely be free. And a lot of content will be free because money gets generated around it. So what I would like to see happening is essentially a straight-through way of saying, well, here's what I have created, put it in the pipeline, put it into the community, put it up to people who know, who also will help you sell, right? And then again, I think the selling will be defined completely different, because the selling of music or of art has to do with the brand of the creator, the brand of the thinker, the brand of the people who turn stuff, unlike sculptures, for example, video can be digitized and given away, sculptures cannot. So your brand is much larger than your product. And we have reduced music in the past, and many other things as well, into this copy of a physical file, or of a digital media file, which it cannot be. So, we're moving away from this idea of saying the web is great because we get all this information. The web is great because we can make 100,000 fake friends. A lot of these things don't matter anymore. It really matters about the context, the experience, the value, right? And what I like to call the context, right? Not just the content, but also what surrounds it. That's what people thrive on. I think it's about the meaningfulness. So I'm trying to branch out in this direction that finds out, what is meaningful to people, what's meaningful to the advertisers, and making a marriage. And I think that's really what good media does. Well, it's a vast collection of lots and lots of people. I like integrators like the Dalai Lama, who basically have a philosophy about openness, that there's putting to work, and that goes, together with people like Martin Luther King, or, of course, you would say that in my generation, I guess. But then there's entrepreneurs like Richard Branson who are irreverent, who basically stumble all over the place and discover stuff. I even like Bill Gates for the fact that he just completely understands this food chain of technology, culture, business, and who's now giving it all away, right? He's giving it up to give all his money away on a regular basis, right? And then there's many other people that I read. I read about 500 feeds from our RSS feeds and stuff. So there's people that influence me, like Larry Lessig in the Creative Commons, Seth Godin on the marketing side. And I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I pick and choose. Basically, it's a cut and paste thing, as Picasso said. What exactly did he say? I think he said that something to the effect of, taking it from everywhere, sort of stealing effectively. I think Bob Dylan said, the best artists are stealing everything. And so I pick from different places, and I do hope that people also pick from me. So in a way, I'm sort of more like a curator of these ideas than an actual or originator. I think the future is a good word for what I do because we're always talking about tomorrow, and tomorrow could be like in 2 hours or it could be in 20 years. So it has this dimension of saying, can we foresee opportunities? Can we recognize where it's going? Can we make scenarios that inspire us to do something and to gain from it, whether it's personally or otherwise, materially? So we're talking about the future, and in many ways, I'm very unlike futurists like Paul Sappho, who are like what I call real futurists, who are people with a very broad knowledge, talking about long-term effects and everything. In that I use it as a keyword much more than as a professional sort of, I'm not a dentist, so I work on people's teeth. So I'm not a futurist that only talks about the future. It's just sort of one of the tags that I like to use. And I think that it also inspires people to think about their future more than anything. I've found in my speeches that if they think about the future of their company, themselves, they open up. So it's a good keyword. And I do think that sometimes that sort of brand of futurism can be a little bit limiting. I think it's very important in today's often virtual world, remote world of emails and video conferences and watching stuff that's disconnected, is to have that sort of personal connection and to experience what it means. You can't experience when you're looking in from a webcam. That's a different experience. So I think what we'll see in the future also is very much this mashing of the virtual world and the real world. So the real world becomes actually much more meaningful. People are often confusing the issue and saying, well, then you could live entirely in this virtual thing. And I think it's entirely the opposite. Just like, you have this total boom of electronic music, people creating mountains of stuff with GarageBand. But last year was the biggest selling year for guitars ever in the history of musical instruments. So what does that tell you? People do both. They spend an inordinate amount of time on experimenting. My son, who is using GarageBand, also becomes a better guitar player for one way or the other. So I think that's a good development. The thing I'm most worried about the future is the issue of privacy and safeguarding, being completely transparent to anybody who cares to look. I think that's going to be the major issue that will keep Google from being the biggest company in the universe, is the issue of privacy and safeguarding people's personal sphere and all these things. And I think that is also a huge business opportunity, but it's a global issue that we'll have to address.